Hello everyone and welcome back to YCS Lille, our 275th YCS here in Europe. I'm here with Joshua Schmidt to teach us a little bit about this storied Mermail deck, which coincidentally, won the last YCS Lille.
11 years ago.
It's a very long time ago. And and is getting some new support in the latest set. So maybe we can come on over to the table and Josh can show us a little bit about the deck.
You've already mentioned a very important term, and that is story, because this is one of my favorite decks from back in the day. So when you're inviting me on here, get ready for some old head talk and get ready for me to walk you through. Basically, I wanted to do a little bit of a history of the Mermail Atlantean deck with you, because there isn't really anything to show off yet, because the cards haven't quite been released yet. So otherwise I could just be showing you some crazy things that these cards can do post Rage of the Abyss, which is impressive. But I feel like in order to understand what this deck is trying to do and will do after Rage of the Abyss, it's very important where it comes from, which is over 12 years ago, actually, there's been some cards printed for Mermail Atlantean that are still going to be very relevant for the deck, how it's being played in just a couple of weeks. And so what I wanted to start with is just explaining a little bit behind, because it's not just Mermail and it's not just Atlantean. They go hand in hand, even though they are technically different archetypes, and they are only getting cards that are part of both archetypes in Rage of the Abyss. But when they came out, they consisted of Atlanteans, which are water monsters that the main purpose of these cards is just to be sent to the graveyard as cost to activate other cards, other water monsters effects. So basically, whenever you pay the cost for a water effect with an Atlantean monster, you get a bonus effect from it, which in the case of Heavy Infantry is destroying a face-up card, Marksman destroys face-down cards, and Dragoons, arguably the best one in the bunch, searches for any Sea Serpent in your deck, right? And so, but the Atlanteans themselves don't do anything in terms of like paying costs, right? Like, which is like odd, because hey, you make this archetype of I want to be paid cost with. Is that the right way to say that? I don't know. You get what I mean? But none of these actually have an effect that requires you to pay cost with a water monster, and that's what the Mermails did, right? That was the whole purpose of the Mermails, which not all of them, but most of them have effects that pay a certain card, like discard, mostly discard a card from your hand, a water monster from your hand for cost to do something. And obviously, if you pair that with Atlanteans that get an effect when you pay the cost with them, that suddenly turns these cards into machines of card advantage. Because, for example, Pike and Turge let you discard a water monster to add a card from graveyard or deck to your hand. So on paper, they are ±0, but if you pay them the cost with an Atlantean, you'll get a +1 out of it. And then Abyss Tias, Abyss Megalo, and Abyss Lead let you special summon themselves from the hand by sending Atlanteans. And then do other crazy things.
So from my memory of the deck, like this one and this one together. That's when the party was starting.
Those are the best ones. Those are the best ones. Tias is the best one in terms of in the bunch of the Mermail decks. It's not the strongest one, but it is the easiest one to facilitate, because it only requires one water discard to special summon itself from the hand, and it just keeps you going because it adds a level 4 or lower Mermail from your deck to your hand. So it's like very simple. You start with discard Dragoons for Tias, and then Dragoons is going to add any Sea Serpent, and Abyss Tias is going to add any level 4 or lower Mermail. So that's already, now you already have the free special summon and a +1, and then you can add, back in the day, depending on what your opponent's board was, you would add like an Abyss Pike and a Marksman, and then that's already like, and then you normal summon the Pike, which discards the Marksman to search another level 3 water, and the Marksman destroys a card. You can really see how this deck can like get going and facilitate a lot of card advantage. This, to anyone who played the game in 2012 or 2013, looks crazy, right? In modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Not so much anymore, and that is why they added some other cards to this archetype a little bit down the line. But this is what the deck consisted around mostly in 2013. And it had a package that, this is my favorite part about this deck, and I am very sad to report that this is not part of the deck these days anymore, because they had a floater, like a Mystic Tomato-esque kind of card. When it was destroyed, it would float into Mermails in Abyssland, and a trap card that you would search with Abyss Megalo, because it searches an Abyss spell or trap, that would summon a Mermail from the deck, and then in the end phase, it would destroy itself and destroy the card with it, and that would trigger the Abyssland to summon a Mermail from the deck. And this was like the focal like defensive point of the deck. It was never a deck that played a lot of trap cards, but like searching an Abyss Sphere and setting it was what like made you safe from the majority of your opponent's like pushes, because you would just simply be able to summon this out. This would then get run over, then you would float into one of these guys, discard a heavy infantry on your opponent's turn to destroy one of their cards in their battle phase, and so on and so forth. It was always this like really cool combo deck, but it was always like, it always had this super defensive aspect to it that made it really hard to get run over by other combo decks, because you simply had, you had to dedicate so little spots in your deck to this, but you would still get access to it every single time, so you would never be like under that much pressure, which I think that is why it was the best deck in the format in 2013 when these cards first came out.
I mean, you say it was the best deck, right? And that's totally true. There was a period, I remember, of almost 2 years where Mermail won event after event after event.
No, Mermail was great. Mermail was a really, really good deck after it first came out. And then like late 2012 was when we got the Atlantean cards for, I think, YCS Barcelona. I played the deck ad already, and then it got even more support early 2013. I think Cosmo Blazer was a set that maybe it came out at the end of 2012. I don't remember exactly. But then once you got like Abyss Tias and all that kind of stuff, the deck popped off. The deck was everywhere. It was really, really cool, and a really fun time. I personally loved the Mermail formats in 2013, and then the Dragon Rulers happened.
It was a little blip, and then I think Mermails just came back again.
They did come back. Yeah, Dragon Ruler is this kind of format in 2014 where it just happens. Everything else that happened before Dragon Rulers just like moves down a tier. And then when Dragon Rulers and Spellbooks are dealt with, they all come back, right? And 2014, Mermail actually managed to win the European Championship again with a very similar concept. Few honorable mentions. Abyss Gund is the only Mermail I can think of that you played back then that didn't have an effect to discard other water cards, but it rather had an effect when it was discarded itself. So you could argue it should actually have been an Atlantean card, but
I mean, arguably one of the most powerful Mermails in that it was one of the few that got fit on the Forbidden and Limited list.
Actually, yeah, that card was limited at some point, yeah. And I guess we have to talk about this guy, because people will see this guy a little bit in After Age of the Abyss, because this is one of the cards that holds up the best to modern Yu-Gi-Oh in the bunch, right? Some of these cards, like a floater, when it's destroyed, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, you can see why in modern Yu-Gi-Oh that maybe wouldn't be the best anymore. But this card is very dangerous. This is Molinglacia, the Elemental Lord, and it came out in Abyss Rising alongside the first wave of Mermails. It's a Sea Serpent, and like the other Elemental Lords, you can summon it when you have 5 cards of its attribute in your graveyard, which in this case is water. You need exactly 5 waters in your grave to special summon this guy from your hand. And it just lets your opponent, or has your opponent, discard 2 cards at random from their hand when you summon it. And Mermails has always been a deck that could easily facilitate this card, because obviously everything here is water, and Dragoons, when sent to graveyard to activate a water effect, will search any Sea Serpent that is not like limited to Atlanteans or Mermails or anything like that. This can search Molinglacia, leading to this card basically always being a one of, no matter which format you look at, like Mermail. Like, some people choose to forego it because obviously it can be a little hard to get it going, or like you can draw it too late when you have like 7 waters in the graveyard. But like, for the most part, if you look at any Mermail deck in the history of Mermail decks, it'll be there.
It was around. I mean, I guess back in the day, maybe it wasn't so easy. If you just had a bunch of monsters, you couldn't just link them all away, put them in the graveyard.
You had to put more work to it. You had to put a little bit more work in to do that. But obviously these days, there is there's going to be a lot of combos that just enable you to summon this card on the first turn of the game, and then having your opponent start with 2 cards less in their hand is obviously really, really powerful. One of the main reasons why this deck is so scary to go up against, especially when it is allowed to go first these days. So just so we don't talk about just my super old stories, we're gonna have to talk about Neptabyss and I guess Deep Sea Diva. Deep Sea Diva has been a card that's been played in this deck even back in the day, but not really to facilitate any crazy combos. It was just like a good card, a searchable Sea Serpent that could summon, because you were playing targets for it anyways, because Marksmen and Infantry are Sea Serpents. It was just be treated as like a 1-card synchro that you could search out of your deck when you wanted to apply pressure. And then Neptabyss came out, which is an incredible card. And it came out in, I think, early 2016. And it enabled this deck to go down completely different directions, because everything I've shown you so far requires you to combine multiple cards together, right? Which was one of the main things with Mermail is that you needed to combine Mermails with Atlanteans to get your advantage going, right? You always needed to pair multiple cards together, and Neptabyss changed that because Neptabyss is basically what in modern Yu-Gi-Oh we call something like a one-card combo for the deck, because Neptabyss lets you send a Atlantean monster from your deck to the graveyard as cost to activate its effect, which its effect is just to add another Atlantean card from your deck to your hand. So like you just summon this, you send a Dragoons from the deck to the graveyard 99% of the time, because obviously this is the best one. Add any other Atlantean, even another Dragoons if you wanted to, from your deck to your hand, then trigger the Dragoons in your graveyard to add another Sea Serpent, and that's how you get the ball rolling with just this one card, right?
And Dragoons, unlike some of the more modern cards, not once per turn.
Not once per turn anywhere on that card.
Send it, search 2 more copies.
The only thing that stopped this card from completely revolutionizing the Mermail deck, I mean, it did revolutionize it, but like what stopped it from being super dominant in 2016 is the simple fact that Abyss Tias is not a Sea Serpent. That has always been the biggest, like... I don't know. It's probably good that way. I'll just say that. It's probably good that this card is an Aqua and not a Sea Serpent, and maybe that is the reason why it is an Aqua, because the other 2 are Sea Serpents, the level 7s that discard other cards. But this one specifically, being the best one and only requiring 1 discard, if this was a Sea Serpent, what you could do is you could simply go Prince, send Dragoons, search another Dragoons, and then Dragoons search Tias, and then you've got Tias Dragoons in your hand set up for free with this guy on the board already. So you would pitch the Dragoons, summon the Tias, keep going that way. It would have been crazy if this card was a Sea Serpent. So thankfully it's not.
You mentioned at the beginning, like none of the Atlanteans send for cost, and then once they bring out one that does, it's all kicking off.
And this is the point where this deck has basically changed from this quote-unquote grindy, you play the Sphere Lindy backup kind of, like you're trying to piece together combos to get pushes going. This is where it changed into a more modern deck where you just like try to summon your Neptabyss and go from there, and that's where a lot of its pushes, like back in the day, you could push on turn 1 or 2, but it was far more likely that you would take some turns to like grab your cards together, right? You need to like assemble and find the right moment to push into your opponent's board, and you would like spend time to set up a Lin that they would have to run over, or summon like a Genix Undyne, which is another monster that sends a water monster from your deck for cost, but it's obviously not the strongest card in itself. It's just a 1200 normal summon. But you would like take turns, see how much time you could spend to assemble your combos, and then pop off on a certain turn, right? Now, if you have access to Neptabyss, you're popping off turn 1. Basically, no matter what your hand is, you just like search the cards you need already. Also, Neptabyss has a graveyard effect when it's sent for cost as well. It's not only an enabler, it's also a card that if you discard it for cost, it does revive an Atlantean monster in your graveyard. So this is basically how Mermail was played up until this point. And this is basically what these new support cards in Rage of the Abyss will be leaning towards. Funnily enough, there is I don't know how I feel about this concept, but there is cards in Rage of the Abyss that are both okay, so there is you notice how they have a very distinct art style to the Mermails, which are all like these kind of mermaidy cards, and then the Atlanteans, I don't even know what they are, but they're like more like these kind of fish warriors. I mean, they're Sea Serpents, but you know what I mean, right? You can definitely tell a difference between a Mermail and an Atlantean card. In Rage of the Abyss, they're printing an Atlantean card that completely looks like a Mermail card, and they're printing an Atlantean card that looks like a Mermail card. And then in the text, it says this card is also treated as an Atlantean/Mermail card. So they're the first time they're printing a card that's part of both archetypes. But they are phenomenal cards. They are phenomenal cards because they solve this sort of problem of Mermail, that its playstyle is just very, very 2013. Except for Neptabyss. Neptabyss is the only exception, which has led to this deck being this sort of like, well, if I draw Neptabyss, suddenly my deck can keep up with modern Yu-Gi-Oh decks. If I don't find Neptabyss, my deck just needs too much time in comparison to other decks, because I'm not going to have the time to assemble my hands over the course of like 3, 4, 5 turns and then push. I'm basically forced to compete with these decks on the first or second turn of the game immediately, and if my hand doesn't do that, then I'm not going to have I'm not going to have a chance, right? And so these new cards give you more combo potential on the first turn, because they are not just it's not just no longer Neptabyss or Diva or Bust, basically, right? Because there's a Mermail card that when you pay the cost of a water effect with it, you get to summon an Atlantean from your deck now. So that is more access to Neptabyss in that way. And then I always have to make sure I don't mess it up. The one that is called an Atlantean card, but then in the text is also a Mermail card. The one that looks like a Mermail, basically, that one is just a phenomenal discard outlet as well, right? Because nothing wrong with Abyss Spike, you know, like normal summon, discard a water, add a level 3 water from my deck to your hand. Nothing wrong with that, but like you have spent your normal summon on a 1600 that requires you to have a good discard in your hand. And then that's it, right? He's just chilling there on the board with the 1600 attack. The new one lets you just discard it. You tribute itself and another card from your hand to search, I think search or special summon a Mermail from your deck. So you can really see how this can get you going without having to spend your normal summon and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, like these cards are very powerful normal summons, and in 2013, you've got the time to use multiple normal summons in a game. But in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Nowadays, you don't get that many normal summons. I mean, not unless you're running Time-Rending Morganite, but, you know.
You're not going to do that in Mermails because you're going to have these guys that have to activate in hand, right? Morganite also prevents you from doing that. Another cool thing that this deck, that was kind of special for this deck back in the day, and that it still does, is how these cards interact with Xyz monsters. Because the main way we've talked about so far on how you would pay the cost is by discarding a water monster for another water monster. But the way these guys are worded actually says, like, whenever you pay the cost to activate a water effect, then I will trigger. This includes being detached off of an Xyz monster to go to the graveyard. And this is why both Bahamut Shark and Abyss Dweller have been super powerful in this deck, because they are water Xyz, good water Xyz at that if you ever get to summon them with an Abyss, with an Atlantean Dragoons attached, you would detach it, you would get the effect of your Xyz monster, and then this would trigger because it was sent to the graveyard to activate a water effect. And this is, funnily enough, an interaction that the deck is still using to this day in post-Rage of the Abyss, because obviously there is really good targets for Bahamut Shark to summon in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Back in the day, in my days, this would summon an Abyss Trite, which just had a very big defense and was hard to get over. But obviously, we all know another card that is very dear to my heart is Totally Awesome, which is something that this deck can essentially spam, because Bahamut Shark also is not once per turn. So there are combos for this deck after Rage of the Abyss where you can summon up to, I've seen people summon three Totally Awesomes on the first turn by going into multiple copies of Bahamut Shark. Now, I don't know if that's going to be worth the extra deck space, right? Because you're going to have to like play multiple Bahamut Sharks and multiple Toads for that. And at this point, like, do you really need to summon 3 Totally Awesomes to actually, like, there's a very realistic possibility where just like 1 or 2 is enough, right? Because you're going to probably like summon a Molinglacia, so your opponent doesn't have that many cards to begin with. Do you really need to summon 3 Totally Awesomes on them? I mean, I would if I could.
Yeah, why limit yourself to, you know?
True, fair enough.
I mean, you're pointing to these cards like Abyss Dweller and Bahamut Shark are 2 of the most powerful cards that have persisted like throughout Yu-Gi-Oh! Since they were released. I mean, Abyss Dweller probably a bit more than Bahamut Shark, but ever since Totally Awesome's come out, being able to get 2 level 4 water monsters on the field for a Bahamut Shark has been an amazing thing. So you're telling me that the Atlantean deck like facilitates that and benefits off summoning these like super powerful XYZ monsters. That is a super cool interaction.
It would really be the ideal spot to be in with any sort of combo deck, is to not only have access to Bahamut Shark, but also get advantage off of just using the effect. It's not just like you're getting a Bahamut Shark, you're also getting your Dragoon Surge from it, which further facilitates combos. But Totally Awesome is also extra dangerous whenever you're actually playing a water deck, because if your opponent does play into your board and you use those Totally Awesome negates to stop them from doing so, you will keep adding back water monsters from your graveyard to your hand, because Toad does that when it goes to the graveyard, adds back a water monster. So it creates also like awesome follow-up for your deck. So that is another thing that these decks will be doing, and they also get access to more extra deck monsters, extra deck tools from Rage of the Abyss. Because I mean, there's Abyss Alacia, which is a card that came out in 2019, which is a deck that a card that like it's in this period of time where they gave a lot of older decks just like a Link 2, you know, and some got the better end of the stick and some got the worst end of the stick. Abyss Alacia is fine. It's a fine card. Like it's conceptually, I really like it because it's a very interactive card. Because what it does is it lets you discard cards to trigger your Atlanteans, which is very in theme for a Mermail card. But it only does so on the opponent's turn, which I personally find that quite cool, because then, you know, the idea is obviously like set up like a heavy infantry in your hand, summon Abyssalacia on your opponent's turn, use it to discard it to get this effect on your opponent's turn to disrupt them a little bit. I find that very, very cool. It turned out that wasn't just quite enough to make the deck playable again in 2019 or 2020 when these cards first came out. The Alacia, but it is a card that is still seeing play simply because the new ones in Rage of the Abyss will lock you into waters, which is a good thing. That they have put some restrictions on them because they have very powerful effects. The thing is, being restricted into water when you have access to Bahamut Shark Summoning Toad, Abyss Dweller, even Molinglacia, that kind of stuff, right? You still have very powerful options, which I think that's what you're aiming for when you're trying to limit cards with restrictions. Is you're not trying to make them unplayable, right? You're trying to see that they still have powerful options to go for, but like cut them off of some of them. So in some ways, this is a good thing design-wise for this deck. But it remains to be seen how impactful it's going to be for us, especially because obviously over in the OCG, they don't have Totally Awesome, right? They don't have access to that card. We have access to all three of them, thankfully. I'm very happy about that. But it remains to be seen how much that will actually do. But the just to end on a little bit of a primer, I guess, on what else is to come. They get powerful main deck tools in mainly two new Mermail/Atlantean monsters. They get a new equip spell, which solves another problem because Mermail Abyss Megalo is a very good card for this deck. And like I said, it requires you to discard 2 waters, and then on summon you get an Abyss spell trap from your deck for it, which we searched this back in the day.
We searched that. There was a couple of other targets back in the day.
There were other targets, but let's just say we're not going to search this anymore. This is not what we are looking for today. There's an Abyss equip spell in the new set that lets you revive an Atlantean, like special an Atlantean from hand or graveyard when you activate it. So that is most likely what people will be going for. There's other options that people played in like this intermediate period in 2016. There was like there's a Mermail equip spell that forces you to negate the first spell card your opponent uses. Mm-hmm. There's the same one for traps, but obviously people preferred the spell version because that was better when you set up a board and then your opponent tries to play into it. It's not like you can't choose which one you negate. It's just like you equip it to your Megalo, and then whenever your first spell card resolves, it'll send itself to the graveyard to stop it. But I think people are choosing to run the revival equip spell with the Megalo.
That makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
So that's what they're getting. And then they are also getting new extra deck tools. There's a new Link 3 monster, which is quite powerful. But the big deal is that they're getting a rank 7 that requires 3 level 7 monsters. So it is quite hard to summon, but it has a very powerful effect. And it also just has the Zodiac treatment of once per turn, you can also Xyz summon it by putting it on any other Mermail Xyz.
So you can make it with 2 level 7s over an Abyss Gaios.
You can make it with 2 level 7s over an Abyss Gaios, which was this was the guy back in the day. He's not the guy anymore. He's been downgraded to not. He's been the guy that summons the guy now. But also, whenever you're making a Bahamut Shark, you do have the option to go into an Abyss Trite instead of the Totally Awesome, which I don't know if you are willing to forego the Totally Awesome for this, but you can. And then overlay the Abyss Trite into the new rank 7, which has 2 very powerful abilities. One is only really useful for going second, but if you do go second, it is very powerful. You detach material from it, and then you send a water monster from your deck to the graveyard, also for cost, so it's going to trigger the Atlanteans, and then I think it destroys cards on your opponent's side of the field. I don't know exactly how many, but something like that. Like you detach, send from deck for cost, and then destroy cards. The thing is, it has to destroy, so you can't use it when you're going first. Like you can't destroy your own cards or something like that. That'd be very powerful. But going second into boards, that's going to be really powerful. But then it has an effect that you can use when you go first, which is that if it's sent to the graveyard, it revives water monsters from your grave. I think based on the number of materials it had, or just like, no, just I think straight up just 3, actually.
Yeah, I think it has something to do with the number of materials, but is it enough for you to forego a Totally Awesome?
See, it's got to do a lot for me to not summon a Totally Awesome is the thing. But no, I'm pretty sure it's just going to be one of those decks where you're going to have to work out some combo lines. And in some lines, in order to be, for example, insulated from a Nibiru the Primal Being or something like that, you're gonna choose to summon the Totally Awesome early and then keep going next to it. And in other lines, when maybe you already have insulated from that card for somehow, like you've checked it. Like summoning Bahamut Shark itself is already a pretty good check for a Nibiru, right? Like if I summon Bahamut Shark and my opponent has Nibiru and I've already summoned 5 times, they'd be forced to use it because otherwise, they're not going to allow me to summon the Totally Awesome. So if I summon the Bahamut Shark and my opponent is like, that's okay. I'm like, oh, okay, like then maybe I'll consider going into the new one and keep going with that. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to look at what exactly this deck is gonna be able to do post Rage of the Abyss. I will say it's never gonna be. It's probably never going to get the same place in my heart as the grindy Abyss Sphere, Abyss Lind deck from 2013. That will forever be my favorite version of Mermail Atlantean, one of my favorite decks of all time. But I am happy to see some of these cards back in the format, like some of these cards. Not all of them are going to make it into the modern version of the deck, but yeah, I'm hoping I was able to give you a little bit of an. There was a lot of old man talk in this, but we don't have the new cards yet.
Back in my day.
Yeah, but no, it is one of my favorite archetypes of all time, so I'm looking forward to it, and yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Josh. So I guess to ask you a question at the end, 2024 so far has definitely been the year of fire. We've had powerful Fire King decks, we've had Snake Eyes, obviously, so now we have the Rage of the Abyss coming out. Is it to you next year? Are we going to have the Year of Water to overtake the Year of Fire?
So I don't think so, because from what I've seen, it's like this. It's one deck, right? It's not like you're not getting the plethora of what was Snake Eyes, Fire King, Rescue Ace. All these guys worked together. I mean, Snake Eyes did the heavy lifting, to be fair, but like it's just one Mermail deck against the rest of the world. I don't know if it's gonna really be the Year of Water for that one. They would have had to put more generic water support that could have gone into a lot of different decks. Maybe an original water spoils that summons the level 1 water from your deck or something. Then we could have...
get that Neptabyss out of the deck. Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Josh, and giving us an interesting history of this deck.
Yeah.
Everyone on the stream watching at home, I hope you've enjoyed this combo tutorial / deck overview, and be sure to check out, we have Marcello and Alberto doing a Duelist Chronicle with this very deck from the YCS Lille final back in 2013. But keep watching the stream and we'll be back shortly.